Anyone who had just walked down the drive in the August sun, the open door of the red house revealed a delightfully inviting hall of which even the mere sight was cooling. It was a big, low roofed, oak beamed place with cream washed walls and a diamond paned windows below curtained on the right and left were doors leading into other living rooms, but on the side which faced you as you came in were windows again, looking onto the small grass court, and from open windows to open windows such air as there was played gently. The staircase went up in broad, low steps along the right hand wall, and turning to the left led you along a gallery which ran across the width of the hall, across the width of the hall to your bedroom. That is, if you were going to stay the night. Mr. Robert Ablett's intentions in this matter were as yet unknown. As Audrey came across the hall, she gave a little start as she saw Mr. Kelly suddenly sitting unobstructedly in a seal beneath one of the front windows, reading no reason why he shouldn't be there. Certainly a much cooler place than the golf link on such a day, but somehow there was a deserted air about the house that afternoon, as if all the guests were outside, or perhaps the wisest place of all up in their bedroom sleeping. Mr. Kelly's, the master's cousin, was a surprise and having given a little exclamation as she came suddenly upon him. She blushed and said, "Oh, I beg your pardon, sir. I didn't see you at first." And he looked up from his book and smiled at her, an attractive smile it was on that big, ugly face. Such a gentleman, Mr. Kelly, she thought to herself as she went on, and wondered what the master would do without him if this brother, for instance, had to be bundled back to Australia. It was Mr. Kelly who would do most of the bundling. "So this is Mr. Robert," said Andrew to herself as she came in sight of the visitor. She told her aunt afterwards that she would have known him anywhere for Mr. Mark's brother, but she would have said that in any event. Actually, she was surprised. Dapper little Mork, with his neat pointed beard and his carefully curled mustache, with his quick, darting eyes, always moving from one to the other of any company he was in, to register one more smile to his credit when he had said a good thing, one more expectant look when he was only waiting his turn to say it. He was a very difficult man from this rough looking, ill dressed colonial staring at her so loweringly. I want to see Mr. Mork Ablett, he growled. It sounded almost like a threat. Andre recovered herself and smiled reassuringly at him. She had a smile for everybody. Yes, sir. He is expecting you if you will come this way. Oh, so you know who I am. Eh, Mr. Robert Ablett. Hey, that's right. So he is expecting me. Eh, he will be glad to see me. Eh, if you will come this way, sir, said Audrey primly. She went to the second door on the left and opened it. Mr. Robert, she began and then broke off. The room was empty. She turned to the man behind her. If you will sit down, sir, I will find the master. I know he is in because he told me that you were coming this afternoon. Oh, he looked round the room. What would you call this place? The office, sir. The office? The room where the master works, sir. Works? That's new. Didn't know he would ever done a stroke of work in his life. Where he writes, sir, said Audrey with dignity. The fact that Mr. Mark wrote through nobody knew what was a matter of pride in the housekeeper's room. Not well dressed enough for the drawing room. I will tell the master you are here, sir, said Audrey decisively. She closed the door and left him there. Well, here was something to tell Auntie. Her mind was busy at once going over all the other things which he had said to her, and she had said to him quite like directly I saw him. I said to myself, why you could have knocked her over with a feather. Feathers indeed were a perpetual menace to Audrey. However, the immediate business was to find the master. She walked across the hall to the library, glanced in, came back a little uncertainly, and stood in front of Kelly. If you please, sir, she said in low, respectful voice. Can you tell me where the master is? It's Mr. Robert called. What? Said Kelly, looking up from his book. Who? Audrey repeated her question. I don't know. Isn't he in the office? He went up to the temple after lunch. I don't think I have seen him since. Thank you, sir. I will go up to the temple. Kelly returned to his book. The temple was a brick summer house in the gardens at the back of the house, about 300 yards away. Here Mark meditated sometimes before retiring to the office to put his thoughts upon the paper. The thoughts were not of any great value. Moreover, they were given off at the dinner table more often than they got on to the paper, and got on to the paper more often than they got into print. But that did not prevent the of the red master of the red house from being a little painted when visitor treated the temple carelessly, as if it had been erected for the ordinary purposes of flirtation and cigarette smoking. There had been an occasion when two of his guests had been found playing fives in it. Mark had said nothing at the time, save to ask with a little less than his usual point whether they couldn't find anywhere else for their game. But the offenders were never asked to the Red House again. Audrey walked slowly up to the temple, looked in, and walked slowly back. All that walk for nothing. Perhaps the master was upstairs in his room, not well dressed enough for the drawing room. Well, now, Auntie would you like anyone in your drawing room with a red handkerchief around his neck and great big dusty boots and listen? One of the men shooting rabbits. Auntie was partial to a nice rabbit and onion sauce. How hot it was, she won't say no to the cup of tea. Well, one thing Mr. Robot wasn't saying the night he hadn't any luggage. Of course, Mr. Mark could lend him things. He had clothes enough for 6. She would have known him anywhere for Mark's brother. She came into the house as she passed the housekeeper's room on her way to the hall. The door opened suddenly, and a rather frightened face looked out. "Hello, Odd," said Elsie. "It's Audrey," she said, turning into the room. "Come in, come in, Audrey," called Miss Stevens. "What's up?" said Audrey, looking into the door. "Oh, my dear, you gave me such a turn. Where have you been? Up to the temple?" "Did you hear anything?" "Hear what?" "Bangs and explosions and terrible things." "Oh," said Audrey, rather relieved. "One of the men shooting rabbits." "Why," I said to myself as I came along, "Auntie's partial to a nice rabbit." I said, and I shouldn't be surprised if dash dash. "Rabbits," said her aunt scornfully. "It was inside the house, my girl." "Straight it was," said Elsie. She was one of the housemaids, I said to Miss Stevens. "Didn't I?" "Miss Stevens, that was in the house," I said. Audrey looked at her aunt and then at Elsie. "Do you think he had a revolver with him?" she said in a hushed voice. "Who?" said Elsie excitedly. "The brother of his from Australia." I said as soon as I set eyes on him, you are a bad lot, my man. That's what I said, Elsie. Even before he spoke to me, rude, she turned to her aunt. Well, I give you my word. If you remember, Audrey, I always said there was no saying with anyone from Australia. Miss Stevens lay back in her chair, breathing rather rapidly. I wouldn't go out of this room now, not if you paid me 100,000 pounds. Oh, Miss Stevens, said Elsie, who badly wanted 5 shillings for a new pair of shoes. I won't go as far as that, not myself, but there, cried Miss Stevens, sitting up with a start. They listened anxiously, the two girls instinctively coming closer to the older woman's chair. Door was being shaken, kicked, rattled. Listen, Audrey and Elsie looked at each other with frightened eyes. They heard man's voice, loud, angry. Open the door, it was shouting. Open the door, I say open the door. Don't open the door, cried Miss Stevens in panic, as if it was her door which was threatened. Audrey else, don't let him in. Damn, damn it, open the door, came the voice again. We're all going to be murdered in our beds, she cowered, terrified. The two girls huddled closer, hand with an arm around each. Miss Stevens sat there waiting. Chapter number 2. Mr. Gillingham gets out at the wrong station. Whether Mark Ablett was a bore or not dependent on the point of view, but it may be said at once that he never bored his company on the subject of his early life. However, stories get about, there is always somebody who knows it was understood, and this anyhow on the Mark's own authority that his father had been a country clergyman. It was said that as a boy, Mark had attracted the notice and patronage of some rich old spinster of the neighborhood who had paid for his education both at the school and university. At about the time when he was coming down from Cambridge, his father had died, leaving behind him a few debts as a warning to his family and reputation for short sermons as an example to his successor. Neither warning nor example seems to have been affected. Mark went to London with an allowance from his patron, and it is generally agreed made acquaintance with the moneylenders he was supposed by his patron and any others who inquired to be writing, but what he wrote other than letters asking for more time to pay has never been discovered. However, he attended the theatres and music halls very regularly, no doubt with a view to some serious articles in the Spectators on the decadence of an English stage. Fortunately, from Mor's point of view, his patron died during his third year in London and left him all the money he wanted. From that moment, his life loses its legendary character and becomes more matter of history. He settled accounts with the moneylenders, absconded, abandoned his crop of wild oats to the harvesting of others, and became in his turn a patron. He patronized the odds. It was not any usurers who discovered that Mark Ablett no longer wrote for money. Editors were now offered free contribution as well as free lunches. Publishers were given agreements for an occasional slender volume in which the author paid all expenses and waived all royalties, promising Young painters and poets dined with him, and he even took a theatrical company on tour, playing host and lead with equal lavishness. He was not what most people call a snob. A snob has been defined carelessly a man who loved a lot and more carefully mean as a mean lover of mean things, which would be a little unkind to the peerage if the first definition were true. Mark had his vanities undoubtedly, but he would sooner have met an actor manager than an earl. He would have spoken of his friendship with Dante had that been possible, more glibly than of his friendship with the Duke. Call him a snob if you like, but not the worst kind of a snob. A hanger on but to the skirts of art, not society, a clamber, but in the neighborhood of Parnassus, not hell. His patronage did not stop at the arts, it also included Matthew Kelly, a small cousin of 13, whose circumstances were as limited as had been Mark's own before his patron had rescued him. He sent the Kelly cousin to the school and Cambridge. His motives, no doubt, were unworldly enough at first. A mere repaying to his account in the recording Angel's book of the generosity which had been lavished on him, a laying up of treasure in heaven, but it is probably that as the boy grew up, Mark's design for his future were based on his own interests as much as those of his cousin, and that a suitably educated Matthew Kelly of 23 was felt by him to be a useful property for a man in his position, a man, that is to say, whose vanities left him so little time for his affairs. Kelly then, at 23, looked after his cousin's affairs. By this time, Mark had bought the red house and the considerable amount of land which went with it. Kelly superintended the necessary stuff. His duties indeed were many. He was not quite secretary, not quite land agent, not quite business advisor, not quite companion, but something of all four. Mark leant upon him and called him K, objecting quite rightly in the circumstances to the name of Matthew. K, he felt, was above all dependable, a big, heavy, jawed, solid fellow who did not bother you with the unnecessary talk, a boon to a man who liked to do most of the talking himself. Kelly was now 28. Kelly was now 28 but had all appearance of 40, which was his patron's age. Spasmodically, they entertained a good deal at the Red House and marked a preference, called it kindliness, a vanity as you please, was for guests who were not in position to repay his hospitality. Let us have a look at them as they came down to that breakfast of which Stevens, the parlour maid, has already given us a glimpses. The first to appear was Major Rumbold, a tall, grey-haired, grey-moustached, silent man, wearing a Norfolk coat and grey flannel trouser, who lived on his retired pay and wrote natural history articles for the paper. He inspected the dishes on the side table, decided carefully on category, and got to the work on it. He had paused on the sausage by the time of the next arrival. This Bill Beverly, a cheerful young man in white flannel trousers and blazer. "Hello, Major," he said as he came in. How's the goat? It isn't goat, said the major gruffly. Well, whatever it is, the major grounded. I make a point of being polite at breakfast, said Bill, helping himself largely to porridge. Most people are so rude. That's why I asked you, but didn't tell me if it's a secret coffee, he added as he poured himself out a cup. No thanks. I never drink till I have finished eating. Quite right, Major. It's only manners. We sat down opposite to the other. Well, we have got a good day for our game. It's going to be dashed hot, but that's where Betty and I score. On the fifth green, your old wound, the one you got in that frontier skirmish in 43, will begin to trouble you on the act. Your liver, undetermined by years of curry, will drop to peace on the 12th. Oh, shut up, you ass. Well, I am only warning you. Hello, good morning, Miss Norris. I was just telling the major what was going to happen to you and him this morning. Do you want any assistance, or do you prefer choosing your own breakfast? Please don't get up, said Miss Norris. I won't help myself. Good morning, Major. She smiled pleasantly at him. The Major nodded. Good morning. It's going to be hot. As I was telling him, began Bill. That's where. Hello, here is Betty. Morning, Kelly. Betty, Clydeline, and Kelly had come in together. Betty was the 18-year-old daughter of Miss John Clydeline, widow of the painter, who was acting hostess on his occasion for Mark. Ruth Norris took herself seriously as an actress and on her holidays seriously as golfer. She was quite competent as either neither the state society nor sandwich had any terrors for her. By the way, the core will be around at 10 by 30, said Kelly, looking up from his letters. You are lunching there and driving back directly afterwards. Isn't that right? I don't see why we shouldn't have two rounds, said Bill hopefully. Much too hot in the afternoon, said the major. Get back comfortably for tea. Mark came in. He was generally the last. He greeted them and sat down to the toast and tea. Breakfast was not his meal. The others chattered gently. The others chattered gently while he read his letters. Good God, said Mark suddenly. There was an instinctive turning of heads towards him. I beg your pardon, Miss Norris, sorry, Betty. Miss Norris smiled her forgiveness. She often wanted She often wanted to say it herself, particularly at rehearsals. I say K. He was frowning to himself, annoyed, puzzled. He held up a letter and shook it. Who do you think this is from? Kelly, at the other end of table, shrugged his shoulders. How could he possibly guess? How could he possibly guess? Robert said, Mark. Robert. It was difficult to surprise Kelly. Well, it's all well to say well. It's all well to say well. Like that said Mark. Previously, he is coming here this afternoon. I thought he was in Australia or somewhere. Of course. So I did. So did I. He looked across at Rumboldt. Got any brothers? Major? No. Well, take my advice and don't have any. Not likely to now, said the major. Bill laughed. Miss Norris said politely, but you haven't any brothers, Mr. Ablett. One, said Mark grimly. If you are back in time, you will see him this afternoon. He will probably ask you to lend him £5. Don't. Everybody felt a little uncomfortable. I have got a brother, said Bill helpfully, but I always borrow from him. Like Robert, said Mark. When was he in England last? Asked Kelly. About 15 years ago, wasn't it? You would have been a boy, of course. Yes, I remember seeing him once about then, but I didn't know if he had been back since. No, not to my knowledge. Mark is still obviously upset, returned to his later personality, said Bill. I think relations are I think relations are a great mistake. All the same, said Betty a little daringly. It must be rather fun having a skeleton in the clipboard. Mark looked up, frowning. If you think it's fun, I will hand him over to you, Betty. If he isn't, if he hasn't any like he used to be, and like his few letters have been volcanoes. Kelly grunted. All I know was that one didn't ask questions about him. It may have been meant as a hint to any too curious guest not to ask more questions, or a reminder to his host not to talk too freely in front of strangers. Although he gave it the sound of a mere statement of a fact, but the subject dropped to be succeeded by the more fascinating one of the coming foursome. Miss Caledline was driving over with the players in order to lunch with an old friend who lived near the links, and Mark Kelly were remaining at home on affairs. Apparently, affairs were now to include prodigal brother, but that need not make the foursome less enjoyable. At about the time when the major, for whatever reasons, was fluffling his tee shot at the 16th, and Mark and his cousin were at their business at the Red House, an attractive gentleman of the name of Anthony Gillingham was handing up his ticket at Woodham station and asking the way to the village. Having received directions, he left his bag with the station master and walked off leisurely. He is an important person to his story, so that it is as well as we should know something about him before letting him loose in it. Let us stop at the top of the hill on the some excuse and have a good look at him. The first thing we realize is that he is doing more of the looking than we are. Above a clean shaven face, of the type usually associated with the Navy, he carries a pair of grey eyes which seemed to be absorbing every detail of our person. To the strangers, this look is almost alarming at first until they discover that his mind is very often elsewhere, and that he has, so to speak, left his eyes on the God while he himself follows a train of thought in another direction. Many people do this, of course, when, for instance, they are talking to one person and trying to listen to another, but their eyes betray, betray them. Antony's never old. Antony's never did. He had seen a good deal of the world with those eyes, though never as a sailor. When at the age of 21, he came in his mother's money, £400 a year. Old Gillingham looked up from the stock reader's gazette to ask what he was going to do. See the world, said Antony. Well, send me a line from America or whatever you had to. Alright, said Antony. Old Gingham returned to his paper. Antony was a younger son and, on the whole, not so interesting to his father as the cadets of certain other families. Champion brigades, for instance, but when Champion Brigade was the best hierophant but he had ever bred. Antony, however, had no intention of going further away than London. His idea of seeing the world was to see not countries but people and to see them from as many angles as possible. They are all shots in London. If you know how to look at them. So Anthony looked at them from so Anthony looked at them from various strange corners from the viewpoint of the valet. The newspaper reporter, the waiter, the shop assistant with the independence of £400 a year behind him, he enjoyed it immensely. He never stayed long in one job and generally closed his connection with it by telling his employer contrary to all etiquettes is understood between master and servant exactly what he thought of him. He had no difficulty in finding a new profession instead of experience and testimonials. He offered his personality and sporting bet. He would take no wages in the first month, and if he satisfies his employer, double wages in the second. He always got his double wages. He was now 30. He had come to the Valdem for a holiday because he liked the look of the station. His ticket entitled him to travel further, but he had always intended to place himself in the matter. While them attracted him, and he had a suitcase in the carriage with him and money in his pocket. Why not get out? The landlady of the George was only too glad to put him up and promised that her husband would drive over that afternoon for his luggage. And you would like some lunch, I expect, sir. Yes, but don't give yourself any trouble about it. Call anything you have got. What about beef, sir? She asked, as if she had 100 varieties of meat to select from and was offering him her best. That will do splendidly, and a pint of beer. While he was finishing his lunch, the landlord came in to ask. The landlord came in to ask about the luggage. Anthony ordered another pint and soon had him talking. It must be rather fun to keep a country inn, he said, thinking that it was about time he started another profession. I don't know about fun, sir. It gives us a living and a bit over. You ought to take a holiday, said Anthony, looking at him thoughtfully. Funny thing you're saying that, said the landlord with a smile. Another gentleman over from the Red House was saying that only yesterday offered to take my place at all. He laughed rumblingly. The Red House, not Red House, Stanton. That's right, sir. Stanton's the next station to Waltham. The Red House is about a mile from here, Mr. Ablett. Anthony took a letter from his pocket. It was addressed from the Red House, Stoughton, and signed Bill. Good old Bill, he murmured to himself. He's getting on. Anthony had met Bill Beverly 2 years before in a tobacconist shop. Gillingham was on one side of the counter and Mr. Beverly on the other. Something about Bill, his youth and freshness, perhaps attracted Anthony, and when cigarettes had been ordered and an address given to which they were to be sent. He remembered that he had come across an aunt of Beverly's aunts at a country house. Beverly and he met again a little later at the restaurant. Both of them were in evening dress, but they did different things with their napkins. And Anthony was the more polite of the two. However, he still liked Bill. So on one of his holidays the more when he was unemployed, he arranged an introduction through a mutual friend. Beverly was a little inclined to be shocked when he was reminded of their previous meetings, but this uncomfortable feeling soon wore off, and he and Anthony quickly became intimate. But Bill generally addressed him as "dear madman" when he happened to write. Anthony decided to stroll over to the Red House after lunch and call upon his friend, having inspecting his bedroom, which was not quite the lavender smelling country in bedroom of fiction, but sufficiently clean and comfortable. He set out over the fields. As he came down the drive and approached the old red brick front of the house, there was a lazy murmur of bees in the flower borders, a gentle cooing of pigeons in the tops of the elms, and from distant lawns the air of morning machine, that most restful of all the country sounds. And in the hall, a man was banging at a locked door and shouting, "Open the door! I say, open the door!" "Hello," said Anthony in amazement. Chapter number 3. Two men and a body. Kelly looked round suddenly at the voice. "Can I help?" said Anthony politely. "Something is happened," said Kelly. He was breathing quickly. "I heard a shot. It sounded like a shot. I was in the library. Loud bang. I didn't know what it was, and the doors locked." He rattled the handle again and shook it. "Open the door," he cried. "I say, Mark, what is it?" Open the door. But he must have locked the door on purpose, said Anthony. So why should he open it just because you ask him to? Kelly looked at him in a bewildered way. Then he turned to the door again. We must break it in, he said, putting his shoulder to it. Help me. Kelly turned to him stupidly. Window, window. So much easier to break in a window, said Anthony with a smile. He looked very cool and collected as he stood just inside the hall, leaning on his stick and thinking, no doubt, that a great deal of fuss was being made about nothing, but then he had not heard the shot. Window, of course. What an idiot I am. He pushed past Anthony and began running out in the drive. Anthony followed him. They ran along the front of the house, down a path to the left, and then to the left again over the grass. Kelly in front, the other close behind him. Suddenly, Kelly looked over his shoulder and pulled up short. Here, he said. They had come to the windows of the locked room, French windows which opened onto the lawns at the back of the house. But now they were closed. Anthony couldn't help feeling a thriller of excitement as he followed Kelly's example and put his face close up to the glass. For the first time, he wondered if there really had been a revolver shot in this mysterious room. It had all time he wondered seemed so absurd and melodramatic from the other side of the door. But if there had been one shot, why should there not be two more? The careless fools who were pressing their noses against the pens and asking for it. My God, can you see it? Said Kelly in the shaking voice. Down there, look. The next moment, Anthony saw it. A man was lying on the floor at the far end of the room, his back towards them a man or the body of man. Who is it? Said Anthony. I don't know, the other whispered. Well, we had better go and see. He considered the windows for a moment. I should think if you put your weight into it, just where they join. They'll give all right, otherwise, we can kick the glass in. Without saying anything, Kelly put his weight into it. The window gave and they went into the room. Kelly walked quickly to the body and dropped on his knees by it. For the moment, he seemed to hesitate. Then, with an effort, he put a hand on to its shoulder and pulled it over. Thank God, he murmured, and let the body go again. Who is it? Said Anthony. Robert Ablett. Oh, said Anthony. I thought his name was Mark. He added more to himself than to the other. Yes, Mark Ablett lives here. Robert is his brother. He shuddered and said, I was afraid it was Mark. Was Mark in the room too? Yes, said Kelly absently. Then, as if representing suddenly these questions from a stranger, who are you? But Anthony had gone to the locked door and was turning the handle. I supposed he put the key in his pocket, he said as he came back to the body again. Who? Anthony shrugged his shoulders. Whoever did this, he said, pointing to the man on the floor. Is he dead? Help me, said Kelly simply. They turned the body onto its back, nerving themselves to look at it. Robert Albert had been shot between the eyes. It was not a pleasant sight, and with his horror, Anthony felt a suddenly pity for the man beside him, and a sudden remorse for the careless, easy way in which he had treated the affair. But then one always went about imagining that these things didn't happen except other people. It was difficult to believe in them just at first when they happened to yourself. Did you know him? Well, said Anthony quietly. He meant, were you fond of him? Hardly at all. Mark is my cousin. I mean, Mark is the brother I know best. Your cousin? Yes, he hesitated and then said, is he dead? I suppose he is. Will you do? Will you do? You know anything about the sort of thing? Perhaps I would better get some water. There was another door opposite to the locked one, which led, as Anthony was to discover for himself, directly into a passage from which opened to more rooms. Kelly stepped into the passage and opened the door on the right. The door from the office through which he had gone remained open. The door at the end of the short passage was shut. Anthony, kneeling by the body, follows Kelly with his eyes, and after he had disappeared, kept his eyes on the blank wall of the passage. But he was not conscious of that at which he was looking, for his mind was with the other man, sympathizing with him. Thanks.